Sky's oddly white today, ain't it, Jim? That was the last thing one of my groupies that day said to me before he got cut in half. Couldn't tell you what did it, ain't nobody see nothing. There was no sound. No warning whatsoever. While his top half fell to the cold concrete ground pretty quickly, his legs remained upright. They stood resolute, spouting blood everywhere like a broken faucet. The worst part about the whole thing is, my name ain't even Jim. This is a regular occurrence. It's like a marker telling us that spot is a dead end, gotta find another way around. It really ain't shocking anymore. Got a list of last words. Could make a book out of 'em. A book of last words that only I ever got to hear, have to have heard. I guess it really ain't the image that is what's shocking anymore. Every day is a gore fest, dozens of lives lost in one day, in all sorts of strange and terrible ways. What's shocking is those last words. Last words wasted on me. A guy who doesn't care for the guy next to me, or wasted on a guy just the same as me. I'm just a man doing my job, just like everyone else. Though if it weren't me, or some other chump, who would those last words go to? All of us ain't got no family. Guess we got friends, in the sense coworkers are friends with one another. Nobody real close to give those last words to is what I'm trying to say here. And it's when we've lost a dozen last words wasted, when we turn home. Can't afford to lose more today. We get radioed, then whoever is carrying the red string marks that dead end by tying a blue painted rock to the tip, drops it right there, and then we just follow the red back home. Sometimes, though, we get lucky. You see, there aren't really any dead ends in this maze. It's just a bunch of long parallel halls, with spaces in the walls every couple miles to connect the halls. Well, I guess that is a maze, but not in the traditional sense, you know? When you hit a dead end, rather than there just being a wall there, it really just means that the rest of that hall is death. Meaning if you keep walking forward, the big man at base ain't gonna have nobody to call home, ain't gonna be nobody to respond to that call home. Sometimes it really is just as simple as a clean cut. Sometimes something dark, something the eye can't see, mauls you like a bear. Sometimes people just disappear in the blink of an eye. One moment they're there, next they ain't. So anyway, when we're lucky, that means we just get to walk in a straight line all day. Tiring as hell, the monotony of it, but less tiring than having one more last word to carry around in my back pocket. Time's up for today. We get radioed, then the leader for the day ties a yellow rock to the end of the string, marking the day's stopping point, and we go home. Not really sure how they chose all the colors. But it doesn't matter too much, as long as you know what means what. Sometimes, on the way back though, we do lose one more. Some idiot forgets he's gotta stay in the group, follow the red line, and walks down the wrong way. Walks down into a dead end. I guess that's another time we are lucky. I am lucky. Because when somebody strays away like that, whether it's 'cause they are tired, or they just stupid, ain't nobody got to. And I don't got to hear any more last words that day. You see, most of the time when someone wanders off in the wrong direction on the way home, we kinda just leave it. Nobody really calls their name or tries to chase them down, we usually don't even notice. We had a moment like that a few months back. It was this newbie who just got signed on to the job. But for this kid, I couldn't just leave it. I would have felt terrible if I did. He was 18, fresh out of high school, trying to make some money to send to his baby mama back home. He was far from the brightest. As a matter of fact, I think he had something wrong with him, to put it lightly. Nice kid. Kept talking about his kid's first birthday coming up. Kept talking about how much he loved his baby mama. Sounded like baby mama didn't care for him though, no matter how hard he tried. I kind of felt that. Related to that kid a little. Sure, I didn't have no kid, but that unconditional love he felt, that battle to keep a romance fated to die alive. I had a love like that once, and it made me nostalgic, felt like I was seeing a younger me. Only difference was, While I mean heck I ain't the brightest either, I sure as hell wasn't as stupid as that kid. Either way, it was all endearing. His stupidity, his talks of romance and life, he kept talking about some "when I get home" stuff, as if we were deployed in Afghanistan. Heck, he even kept a little picture of his baby mama and his baby in his pocket. I think he really charmed not just me, but everyone else in our group at the time too. So, when we made a turn, and then when he took one more, I sure as hell took notice. And everyone else did too. A couple of the guys called out his name, me included, but he didn't listen. As a matter of fact, he believed he was going the right way. "It's this way, guys," he called back to us. "You see, this maze, as stated before, ain't really a maze. There ain't too many twists and turns to take. Your goal is always north, and the exit is always south. Impossible to mix up. If you turn at any point, you take the opposite turn once more to get back on track, back to going north or back to going south. And if that's too hard, you got the red line and a group of 16 or so dudes to follow. Well, by the end of the day it's maybe down to about half that. Everyone still calls it a maze, despite it being more maze adjacent than a full-on maze, so maybe that got his simple mind all mixed up. Overthinking things is the worst thing you can do in here. You get the idea in your head that it's supposed to be some grandiose maze, you're gonna make things more complicated than they need to be. So I chased him down, not sure how or why I got picked to be the one. But nobody really wanted this kid to die, so there was no fuss about me having to be the one. This dead end was pretty far back down this specific hall. Turning round, I had lost sight of the group beneath the horizon. And worse, the sun was setting. Dude was cooking it. Really took me a minute to get behind him. I kept trying to call out to him, to tell him he was going the wrong way, but he kept brushing me off. And eventually, when I got really close, and when his stupidity was no longer endearing, I frustratedly began to try to explain to him what was going on. "Kid, this sure as fuck is going towards a dead end," I told him. "No man, you guys got it wrong. We came back down through this hall earlier when mapping things, so we gotta go back up it to get back to the entrance," he excitedly explained, as if he was some directional savant. I grabbed him by the collar and whipped him around to face me. "There's only two ways to go here. North and south. Dead ends are always north, always. It's impossible to run into one going south, unless you ain't following the red string. But just like how dead ends are always north, you are also always following the red string. But we are following the red string," he told me and pointed to the ground. There was no red string. We were way into a dead end. "Oh fuck." I turned and began to pull him. We passed the blue marker. But it was too late. There was a balloon-like pop behind me, and a flurry of guts and gore smacked me hard on the back. I turned around to see myself only holding a scrap of his baby blue off his shirt. He had inflated in a split second, and exploded. Everything that was once that kid was scattered across the cold concrete floor and walls. If I knew my anatomy well, I'm sure as hell I could have identified every one of his bones and organs that was now scattered across the maze. Only ones that I wouldn't be able to pick out would have been the ones I couldn't see stuck to my back. I guess I was wrong a little earlier. Occasionally, some deaths still shocked me. I decided to keep his little Polaroid of his wife and kid. I don't know why. When we got back to base, I remember I stared at it for a good long while I picked the last of his guts out of my hair. He was an exception out of all of us. Someone who had something before coming here, had people to give some proper last words to. But I got his last words. His oh so confident last words. It was sad, but at least his baby mama was gonna get a pretty big payday there soon. Back at base, life's normal, almost. Big men upstairs done everything they can to keep things similar to life outside the zone. We got little mock-up streets with bars and restaurants, little stores where we can go grocery shopping, and little parks where we can feed the birds. We got internet, all the connections we want to the outside world. The only thing is, we can't tell nobody about the inside world. Nothing can be said about the maze, life on base, even the people we live day to day with. Maybe that's why we can't grow close. Because we can barely think of each other as friends. We ain't allowed to. The worst part of it all is the monitoring. All the cameras, the ones you can't see and the ones you can. Makes you feel like a fish in a fish bowl. At least the fish is too stupid to think about anything other than being a fish. It doesn't care about being watched. It'll take a shit in front of you, no second thoughts. While I'm even worried they gotta have a camera attached to the bidet I sit on. Why the hell would they need to be looking at my butthole while I shit? Who knows, but when you're being watched during every aspect of your life, even the dumbest thoughts come to mind. Anything could be a camera, anything could be listening. A couple of nights ago I went out with a few of the guys from the last group I went on an expedition with. We went to the best bar in town, the only bar in town, a place called Lars Ladies and Lagers. It's like a Western-style booby bar. You got busted chicks dancing on the bars and tables, darts and pool in an adjacent room. It's a good time. Although, the chicks ain't hot at all. They're more like the crackheads you'd find selling their bodies on the streets, so they can buy more crack. Super skinny, faces basically melting off their skulls from all the drugs, and their important parts all fake, and not even nicely faked. It's sad to look at when you're sober. Guess that's why they are working in a place where nobody's sober. Anyway, we went there to do the usual business, get wasted, hit on some of the strippers, and hope to take one home for the night. Maybe play some pool or darts if the picking up chicks turned more into putting down chicks. Not like we were being mean to them, just trying to say we ain't know how the hell to talk to girls. You ever get turned down by a girl you pay to love you? Shit hurts, man. That day was one of those days. No luck with the ladies. They were more focused on some new blood that had come in. Pretty handsome fellas, I'll say. I don't blame them for chasing something like that. Chiseled faces, toned muscles, tall, very nice on the eyes. Probably had it good downstairs too. We were playing pool when some guy at the next table started freaking out. He already looked all geeked out when he first came in. But once he had enough drinks in him, rather than calming down, he exploded. I found him! He started screaming. His buddies tried to calm him down, but they just couldn't. Dude fell to the ground in a fetal position and kept screaming it over and over again. The whole bar came to a standstill as we all watched it go down. It was normal for newbies to freak out after seeing someone die for the first time, but this guy was here years before most of us. As a matter of fact, I think every maze man on base at this point isn't anyone who was here 6 or 7 years ago, only him. He was the longest surviving maze man on base as far as we all knew. Eventually the suits came in, looking all serious, dressed in outfits you'd see agents in cliché spy movies wear. When these guys came around, we all knew we weren't seeing that guy again. They grabbed this dude by the ankles and wrists, and lifted him off the ground. It was humiliating even to look at. The rest of his group just got ushered out behind the two carrying the nutcase. Would we be seeing the rest of those guys again too? Probably not. They all were going the same way that the other guy did, so it was likely they were going out like the other guy did too. Things eventually got started again in the bar. People quickly forgot about the scene. The ladies got back to hitting on the new bloods, and we got back to playing pool. That was when Joshua, a short yet lanky little Mexican guy, snuck up to my ear. "Did you hear what they was talking about before?" he asked me. "No, I didn't. Do I want to know?" I said. Apparently, that guy on the ground kept trying to tell his groupies that he had found out what we is looking for in the maze. He looked around and then leaned in closer. "He says we is looking for God, and he found him." "That's some bullshit, Joshua," I scoffed. "And you know that too." "My name is Jose," he corrected me. "And of course I know that's not true. But you know what that means for us? We gotta close off that entire hall now. On occasion, it would take a while for a dead end to kill you. Meaning, it wouldn't be until the next day that we would know that that spot, that hall, was a dead end. Best case scenario, it'd be same day, like what happened then. Worst case scenario, it'd be a week, then who knows how many maze men would be kicking the bucket. Dead ends like that create a hassle not only for us maze men, but the big men running the whole show too. It slows the whole thing down, because now we gotta find where the dead end starts. If we were to just keep working with a whole hallway cut out of the picture, it could possibly make the end goal impossible. So, which group of us is getting assigned to scan that hall? That's when everyone sits on the edge of their seat. Ain't nobody wanna work on the mystery dead ends. You see, when someone gets cut in half, bam, right there is your dead end. When someone gets mauled, bam, right there is your dead end. When someone disappears, that one's a little harder, but still it's fairly easy to place the dead end. The mind ones, it's almost impossible to know, unless you are intentionally looking for the dead end. That means more maze men gone, meaning those left may have higher chances of getting picked, meaning more work for us. And for the big men upstairs, it means resources wasted, people, time, string, cute little painted rocks. It's a lose-lose situation. So we drank and played pool until the morning sun rose. Returned home, then sat and waited for our little assignment slips to come in. All of us anxiously hoping we ain't assigned to go find that dead end. Normally it takes a moment to get the next slip, as the guys update the maze map digitally. So, it took about 2 or 3 days for it to come in. There are only 2 things you can get. You are working today. Or, you are off today. And guess what the hell I got? I got the first option. Suppose I'll write again when my work is all done, that is, if I don't hit the dead end. I don't know how long I have to write this, or if anybody will even look for this post, but I need to make a record somewhere permanent in case they never find me. It's taken a long time to bring me back here, back to where this all started, so I will try and summarize things as best I can. Growing up, my family instilled in me a deep love for the outdoors. We did everything from hunting and fishing to snorkeling and diving in the ocean and lakes. We would always take trips every year all over the states, visiting the national forests, parks, and even some wild places off the beaten path. As I got older, at least once a year, my father would take me on a hunt deep in the wilderness. We would pick a place near home or out of state, pick our game of choice, and we would backpack our way through the rough terrain and dense forests in search of our prize. I really appreciated this time we got to spend together, and I learned a lot from him that would come to help me in ways I never knew. We would be miles deep into what seemed uncharted territory, and days from anything resembling civilization. If anything were to happen to us out there, we were completely on our own. So, Dad made sure to teach me how to be ready for any number of situations. Basic survival skills, how to navigate even without a compass, first aid, and so forth. I remember feeling a bit overwhelmed by how much you prep just to go on a trek into the woods, but eventually it became second nature to me. I started to reflexively pack my things and plan accordingly, having spares and backups and plan A's and B's. I would feel as if I were walking without my left shoe if I was missing anything. Apart from preparedness and a decent set of skills that would put any Boy Scout to shame, Dad did teach me something far more important: a healthy respect for the wild. Our natural world is a thing of beauty, and there are some places that will take your breath away. Equally so, you can be breathless in awe, and have your breath taken away in fear. There's always the dangers of wild animals, hazards of the terrain, but the worst of it all is what we don't know about. He said that's why we plan ahead like we do. Because of the unknown. Because too many go off into the dark never to be seen again. leaving nothing but unanswered questions as to why and how it could have happened with hardly a trace left behind. He wasn't superstitious, mind you, just overly cautious and protective. I treated the stories of missing persons as warnings to never underestimate the wild. I never thought I was arrogant or selfish to think, well, that won't be me, because we were always ready for anything. That was until Dad went missing. I was 25 at the time. We were out at our usual stretch of forest outside of our small town, about a day's hiking. It was a beautiful flat wooded valley that had a mountainous backdrop. It was getting late, the sun going down, and we needed some more wood to get a fire going. Dad said he would go fetch some more branches from the stack we made at the edge of our camp. I had only turned my back for a moment to get something out of my pack, when I turned around and he was gone. The second I realized he was missing, was like the world just froze. What I remember most was the quiet. The wind was still, insect noises were now suddenly gone. No birds, no leaves rustling. Just the static-like absence of sound as if you paused your TV. The only sounds I could hear was the eerie echo of my voice calling for my dad and the pounding drum of my heartbeat. A once vibrant forest now felt so empty you could hear a pin drop. His footsteps stopped just at the bundle of limbs and sticks we made at the tree line, then nothing. No more tracks, no scrapes on the ground, he was just gone. My brain hurt. What was going on? How could he just disappear? Thankfully I had a satellite phone to call out with, one valuable piece of our emergency kit. It was a gut-wrenching night alone waiting for the cops to find me. Even though I knew help was on the way, I was in such a state of shock that sleep was impossible. I tried searching for him a little ways in, but found myself too afraid to venture far, so I spent the night gripping my rifle, eyes wide staring at the walls of my tent searching for any moving shadows or noises in the dark. The waiting silence was pure agony. Yet nothing came. After the police arrived that morning, I was questioned, but it was settled quickly and I was allowed to join the search party. We ended up with 200 volunteers altogether, and we combed through the forest at a snail's pace looking for any trace of him. We searched for 3 days, but all we found in the end was his rifle leaned up against a tree. It was definitely his. I've cleaned that rifle and shot it myself dozens of times. The color and feel of the wooden stock, the wear on the dark metal, and the particular scope were all too familiar. That strangest part was that his rifle was 8 miles away from our camp. No animal tracks lead near it, no footprints or boot prints. Just the rifle by itself. Fully loaded. So many questions rolled around in my mind, but nothing resembling an answer would fall into place. It puzzled the detective as well. He had similar cases before mine, but he admitted the lack of evidence was a first for him. He could offer no explanations either that would satisfy. As you could imagine, that experience broke me in a way. I was left with a gaping wound in my soul, a void that I could not fill. It gnawed at me day after day, and I felt the only way I could fill it was to find out what happened to my dad. To find answers, something that might explain how an experienced woodsman just vanished. Perhaps we missed something, overlooked some piece of evidence that could only be found there in the forest. I spent several years regularly going back there, to that same campsite in hopes of finding something. Some trace left behind. I scanned through the area systematically, marking off points on a map to keep track, but I never found anything. Aside from a fruitless search, I never could truly immerse myself in it again. As nighttime would start to fall, I was already on my way back to my car and heading back to my apartment. My nerves just couldn't handle being there alone in the dark anymore. At first I went once a week, then once a month, then every other month. Now it's been 6 years since, and I eventually stopped looking. Guilt gently nags at me about having given up, but I guess I had exhausted all of the hollow logs, gopher holes, and animal tracks that might somehow be holding on to a piece of evidence. Yet I never found anything else out there. Nothing that pointed to where Dad had gone. So life went on. not without the help of a few glasses from a local pub I frequent. One good thing to come out of it, I guess, was Derek. A local detective, Derek Wolf, was the one assigned to my case. While normally you wouldn't expect an officer to get too close to someone who was not just the victim but the only suspect, he was surprisingly empathetic. He was diligent too, and he kept me informed on all the steps they were taking along the way. I'm not sure if he did so at the time because he was suspicious and hoped that I might flinch, that my mask might falter at some point, or he was genuinely trying to keep me a part of the process. We somehow became friends in a way. Even after his part on working the case officially ended after a month, he felt personally unresolved. On his free time he would sit and listen to me talk, offering the occasional advice or suggestion from his own experience in other cases. We would talk about them sometimes, thinking maybe some similarities might open a revelation to mine. It never did. We still keep in touch, a text or call now and then to ask how I am and chat. I know I give him the ever-revealing, "I'm fine" response almost every time, but I really do appreciate him asking. I started spending more time at the ocean instead, finding a sense of calm and peace among the salty breeze and the gentle waves of the sea. I wasn't without a few friends who had an equal love for the outdoors as I did, who were a big help to me in working through my fears and guilt. Although I was a bit hesitant at first, we eventually began our own excursions anew. Some day trips here and there, and eventually camping again. In some more open places than deep forest, and in places like national parks. I wasn't necessarily afraid to go back to what I once loved. Spending time in nature was still near and dear to me. After all, sharing in what me and my dad loved to do made me feel like I was close to him. Rather, I was heeding his old advice about respecting the unknown. I couldn't wrap my head around what happened to him, and how can you prepare for suddenly vanishing into thin air? It wasn't until a hike along a mountain trail that overlooked the old forest where I would finally stumble upon something I had lacked this whole time: perspective. The mountain trail was relatively nearby to the old forested area I searched through a few years ago. This peak I was climbing was the second peak furthest from the forest, following the ridge. We never searched up here because it was so far away, but now, I wish we had. It was near the summit to an open plateau that I found it. I picked up on the trail again. At one point along the way I noticed something odd sitting on a pile of stones. A watch. Not just any watch, my dad's old watch. I knew it was his by the brand, and the small engraving Mom had put inside the band for their anniversary. As if the find itself wasn't enough to make my heart skip a beat, the lost item added an even deeper impact. The watch had stopped working. The dial frozen on 8:43 p.m. The date counter was stuck as well, on the exact date he vanished. I couldn't believe it. It was impossible. There was no way it could be. This watch was nearly 40 miles away from that place, actually more if you take in changing elevation. How could he have traveled that far in just 2 hours on foot? I must have stood there staring at the watch, then out to the horizon for nearly an hour myself, the flood of feelings and information and every rationale spilling over and over again in my mind as I tried to reason on it. Eventually I resumed my hike up the trail, now with a renewed heightened focus on finding clues once again. Anything and everything was under scrutiny to me now. It didn't take long to find something. There was a series of marks on several pines nearing the peak, as if clawed by a bear, or marked by antlers perhaps. Something sharp had marked the trunks of the trees long ago. The course of the marks were almost as if it was struggling to catch its prey, clawing its way through the trees. Stuck into one of the trees where the marks ended was a pocket knife. An old case knife. I recognized the painted bone-handled design immediately. And stuck in the fold of the blade was a bit of fur. I withdrew the knife from soft pine and held it gently in my hands. At last, the forest has revealed one of its secrets. A door finally unlocked in my mind, opening a line of thought with a new path to follow. He didn't just disappear. He was taken. Since then, things have taken a bit of a different turn for me now. Life had always moved forward in time, but it was a bit like walking through a dense fog or rain. I couldn't ever really plan ahead. Now my steps had purpose again. I'm on the trail again. My gear slung over my shoulder, clattering along to my marching steps. The forest has a tranquil quality in this afternoon glow, with the shades of orange light dancing between the branches and leaves in the breeze. Cell service hasn't quite gone out yet, as I just got a notification. It's from Derek. Detective Derek Wolf. Hey Ethan, wanted to give you an update on the new evidence you brought last month. Everything has been logged and the files updated. No DNA traces on the watch, not surprising since it was in the elements for so long. The tuft of animal fur, however, was unknown. Rather inconclusive. Normally the lab guys can match up almost anything with hair fibers, but they couldn't match it to any known animals or persons. I'm sorry it's not more definitive than that. Feel free to come by the station anytime to pick up your dad's things. If you need to talk, I'm here for you, bud. Me, thanks Derek for everything. I'll see you soon. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag and set my gear up. Found some dry tinder and got a fire going. My humble little camp was ready. The sun is setting with wisps of now pinkish purple light visible through the treeline. I sat down on my sleeping bag in my tent with the door unzipped. I have my rifle across my lap as I write this post. I hope you find this, Derek. This time, I am ready. Prepared for whatever answer dares speak itself from the darkness and reveal itself. The thing I've searched for these long years is very near. I can feel it. I know because the forest is silent. The air a crisp stillness without a single sound, except for a soft rustle of the underbrush in the treeline. It's here. Only now, there's 2 predators in these woods. I often dream of trains. Actually, I always dream of trains. Every time I sleep. At night, or even during a quick nap, I dream of an unending railway journey. I've had this recurring dream for so long that I can't remember where I'm going, or even where I started. 3 nights ago, I dreamt I was in a buffet car, planning to transfer to the Kensbrook line at a stop named Roundings. Roundings wasn't my ultimate destination. Roundings was just a waypoint. A place where I would transfer to another train which would bring me closer to my final stop. I was sitting at a buffet car table, gently holding an empty, coffee-stained paper cup so that it wouldn't slide off the formica surface when the train decelerated. The conductor stood in front of me, feet shoulder-width apart, swaying gently in opposition to the rocking of the train. Unfortunately, the dream conductor explained to me, when you bought your ticket, you didn't account for the every 3rd Tuesday line restriction. I'm sorry to say this train won't stop at Roundings. But not to worry. You can disembark at a Bingwell and exchange your ticket for an express on the Southway line, then transfer back to the Kensbrook line at Dawson. Might even save you time in the end. It's always like this. In every dream, I'm on the wrong train, or I'm going the wrong way, or there's some obscure reason why I can't get off at the stop I plan to. 3rd Tuesday line restrictions. Seasonal rail schedules. Limited express transfer tickets. There's always some damn thing that prevents me from getting where I need to go. Wherever that is. These waypoints, the transfer stations like Roundings and a Bingwell, don't exist. Roundings and a Bingwell are linked by train in my dreams. In the real world, if there are any places with these names, they have nothing to do with one another. For the remainder of my fitful sleep that evening, my dream self obediently did what the conductor told me to do. I stayed on the train as it rolled through Roundings without stopping. I disembarked at a Bingwell, like he told me to do. I woke up. The next night my endless dream continued like it was a TV show I had paused during my waking hours and restarted once I became unconscious. My dream episode started on the platform at a Bingwell, arguing with the clerk at the ticket window. Behind me fumed a line of a dozen prospective train travelers. A man wearing an enormous backpack was stuck at the end of the queue. He verbalized the traveler's mood with a series of stage-whispered remarks. "Really? Come on. Let's go." I continued to monopolize the small station's sole ticket window. "I was told that I could get to Kensbrook from here," I pleaded with the ticketing clerk. Behind me, from the track, came a shouted, "All aboard," followed by the sounds of a train slowly accelerating out of the station. I hoped that wasn't the train I was supposed to be on. "Of course you can," the clerk replied. "But you cannot get there from the next train. The next train is an express limited which skips the transfer stop at Dawson. You want the express full, which doesn't stop here until 5 o'clock. At that time, the station at Dawson will already be closed due to the reduced summer hours. So now what do? I can issue a voucher for a discount non-reentry return on this line. You'll reboard the 8673 when it stops at Barnsworth, cross the platform and return to Roundings on the 8674. You'll arrive there just after midnight, so the Tuesday restrictions will have lifted." I woke up. The trains always run on time. They never break down and are never delayed. The problem is with my ticket. It's like I've found a flaw in my dreamland's miraculously complex rail schedule. Despite the extent of the rail network, there's no way to travel from my long-forgotten origin to my mysterious destination. The train schedules just don't line up. I've had these dreams for years. Every time I sleep, I board a different train in an attempt to correct whatever problem happened in the previous dream. Night after night I get farther and farther from my forgotten destination. There's a name for this sleep disorder, somnocontinuum. My sleep specialists reassured me that it has no effect on my lifespan. Perhaps the only significant impact of my disorder is that I am afraid to travel by train. Eventually, though, I had to face my fear. 2 weeks ago, I was asked to make an important work trip to Reading. I convinced myself that I was being childish. I needed to face my fear. Besides, I told myself, I'll be traveling in the real world, not in a surreal dreamscape. I live in an outer suburb. I arrived early and sat on the bench on the empty platform. I was to board the 11:29 local, transfer to the Northworks line at Rodingham, and ride 6 more stops to Reading. Board one train, transfer to another, get off. I put the ticket back in my pocket and looked around. A man stood on the far end of the platform, facing me. He was formally dressed, wearing a black suit and tie. However, in a jarring clash of styles, he also wore an enormous red backpack. The clatter of the arriving train sounded from behind me. I looked at my watch, 11:27 a.m. The train was running perfectly on time, just like in my dreams. I stepped into the train. The man in the suit and backpack did the same. The car was nearly empty. I took a seat. I closed my eyes to avoid the glare of the sun. I woke up. The train was still moving. I struggled with confusion for a moment. I'm not dreaming. I'm actually on a train. I'm awake. The window framed a picture of winter beauty, a massive frozen lake. A dense forest of pine trees bent low from snow. I shot to my feet. Summer had turned to winter overnight. How does one run from the incoherent flow of time? The lake is beautiful, am I right? I spun around aggressively. The speaker was the man who boarded the train with me. He was sitting in the seat directly across the aisle. His huge red backpack sat on the seat next to him. You want to know where this train is going? He waited. I will tell you exactly where we are going. But first, I want to tell you about my medical condition. I was hit by a train, he said. He pulled out a chocolate protein bar and offered it to me. A fully loaded taconite drag out of Gladstone. God, it was a beautiful train. It snagged my truck and dragged me a quarter mile. That was on June 10th, 1984. I woke from the coma on July 25th. That's when the dreams started. The same damn dream every night. They said I had somno continuum caused by traumatic brain injury. You also dream of trains? I asked. Not trains. Not exactly. He grinned. Every time I fall asleep, I dream about you. I storm away from him. I felt the train start to slow again. The conductor marched through the car. Basingstoke. Next stop is Basingstoke. Excuse me, I asked. What's after Basingstoke? The train will continue to points west. Points west. West of what? I walked back to James, the man with the backpack. What do you mean, you dream of me? I dream of you being on a train, he said. You are always you. But in every dream, I'm a different person. I'm a passenger, watching you lurch around the train, asking why it didn't stop where you wanted to get off. No offense, but you have got to be the dumbest railway passenger in history. Where am I going? I asked. I've forgotten. He smiled. You, my fellow dreamer, are trying to get to paradise. I had spent 3.5 decades wondering where I was traveling to. My mind raced. I've died and this is the afterlife. I should get off this train, I said. I turned around and walked towards the vestibule. Whoa there, you can't. It's prohibited. I'm getting off this train. At the next stop. I stepped down off the train onto the Basingstoke station platform. James followed. Leaving the station is prohibited, he shouted. I ignored him and walked into the town. Basingstoke wasn't much of a town at all. A dozen old buildings sat on each side of the only street. Signs over storefronts, pharmacy, grocery, shoes. I pulled out my mobile phone, no signal. The sidewalk was clear, but there was snow on the median strip. I stepped onto the white surface. It wasn't even snow. It was a thick, white, spongy blanket. It wasn't even cold. The trees in the median were all the same. Exactly the same. And they had leaves. In winter. I jogged to the pharmacy and pulled on the door. It didn't open. I peered into the store. It was an empty box with a single, blazingly bright bulb suspended in the center. I ran to the median. I tripped on the fake snow and grabbed a tree. It fell over. The tree was plastic. Lightweight and hollow. I ran to one of the cars parked on the street. I rapped my knuckles on the hood. Plastic. Completely hollow. A plastic shell of a car. The town of Basingstoke wasn't a real town. It was a 1-to-1 scale model of a town. Somno continuum, I thought. This is all just a vivid episode of my sleep disorder. I ran back towards the train station. I'll get back on the train. I'll get on the train and go to sleep. This will all be fixed when I wake up. I ran through the station's gate. The train I had arrived on was gone and both tracks were empty, waiting for the next arrival. But now the station was made of plastic. I banged on the brick wall of the ticketing building, plastic. The benches for waiting passengers were like cheap plastic toys scaled up. The clock, at first glance an ornate wrought iron pedestal holding a 4-sided clock, wasn't real. The hands were painted on the clock face, forever announcing that it was 4 o'clock. I pushed on the pedestal and it wobbled, a plastic facsimile of a wrought iron object. I pushed it again out of frustration. It fell over with a plasticky sounding clack. Backpack guy was still standing where I left him. James! I called. He didn't answer. He didn't even move. I walked towards him, shouting his name. Still no reaction. I got even closer. His clothes. His backpack. Even his skin was shiny and smooth. James was now a life-sized replica of the human version of James. I experimentally tapped his chest. Plastic. Hollow. James, what happened? He didn't answer. A small arrivals and departures board hung from the roof over the ticket counter. It also appeared to be plastic, with an unchanging train schedule printed on a sticker: Paradise, Track 1. Reading, Track 2. I sat on the plastic bench next to the ticket window. It sagged under my weight. It was designed to look like a bench, not to function like one. Designed. By who? Why? Why was Basingstoke a life-size version of a model railroad set? I pulled my phone out and found that it was dead. A rectangle of black glass. The town was a lifeless model and the station was perfectly silent. The air was completely still. The loudest sound was that of my own breathing. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun had set while I was exploring Basingstoke's fake main street. Nothing moved, not even James. I might have sat there for 20 minutes. Or 5 hours. Finally, I heard a sound that wasn't made by me. A train whistle. Then a second whistle from the other direction. Soon after, the familiar clanking sound of trains came from both sides. If the printed sticker on the plastic departures board was right, the train on the track next to the platform was the one for Reading. The other train was destined for Paradise. Both trains arrived at the same time. The trains were real. Metal. Heavy. Grimy. Noisy. Real trains stopping at a model train set station. Both trains opened their doors with a hiss. For just a moment, I thought about getting on the Paradise-bound train. Some version of me, a version that lived in someone else's dream, wanted to go there. Nope. I had spent enough time attempting to travel to Paradise. I climbed onto the train for Reading. I looked behind me from the vestibule. James, or the plastic statue of James, stood on the platform, hunched over under the weight of his fake backpack. A worried expression painted onto his plastic face. The door hissed shut and the train slowly rolled away from Basingstoke. The Reading train traveled back the way I had come, through 3 tiny stops, past the frozen lake. I fell asleep and dreamed of Basingstoke. When I woke, it was summer. Other passengers rode the train with me, and Reading was the next stop. I still suffer from somno continuum, but my symptoms have changed. Each night is the same dream. Not a continuation from the previous dream, but one that is exactly the same as the previous one. In my dream, I am the frozen, lifeless, plastic figure of James. I stand on the silent platform, looking at the fake clock lying on the ground. Every night, I spend hour after hour staring, unblinking, at the painted clock's hands forever announcing that it is 4 o'clock. Still, I often dream of trains. I'm exhausted, but I can't just not tell anybody about this. And since I'm not talking with my folks, you guys will just have to do. I'll start from the top, when I first realized something wasn't right. It was Saturday, around 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, pulling at the loose, dark skin that forms the bags under my eyes, and that's when I saw another red, rust-colored scab on my lower eyelid. Either this rash is weakening my skin to the point where it's tearing, or I'm scratching myself bloody in my sleep. I looked down at my left hand, the place where it all started. You'd think I'd put it between 2 feral cats having it out, judging by all the small red, crusty spots and lines running up from my knuckles to my shoulder. It's been 2 weeks, and the rash has only gotten worse. I've tried everything: chamomile lotion, aloe vera, hot water, cold water, even this weird suggestion I got from a buddy online about banana peels, though I think he was just pulling my exceedingly desperate leg. I went to my doctor, and they said I must be having an allergic reaction to something. But what? I haven't changed a thing. Same old laundry detergent, same old body wash, even the same old scratchy bedsheets. They set me up with an appointment with a specialist, but it'll take a month to get in. I tried a few other doctors, and at this point I've had so many doses of Benadryl forced into me that I'm surprised I haven't overdosed. Thankfully, I've got some sick days and vacation time saved up to wait this out until my dermatologist appointment. My boss nearly fainted when she saw me. Can't exactly serve food with a smile while looking like a rashy leper. Between the itching and the medication, my head's swimming. I'm so out of it that I keep remembering scabs that aren't there. Or I'll go to scratch a spot only to find a massive scab I swear wasn't there an hour ago. Like they're moving when I'm not looking. I leaned on the bathroom sink, pulling my eyelid down to get a better look at the scab. A nasty thing, small, but gnarly looking, brownish red, like an old water-soaked wound. There was even a hair poking out of it, which was strange, because as far as I knew, hairs don't grow on eyelids. It must have gotten stuck during the healing process. A loose eyelash, maybe. Still, it bothered me. It was bad enough looking like some kind of burn victim. Now this thing was just sitting there, mocking me. I know you're not supposed to pick at scabs, but I couldn't help myself. I slid my finger up and rubbed at the small black line. N-O-W. Jesus Christ. Okay. Not a hair. It was stiff, and whatever it was felt attached deep. When I poked it, the entire scab shifted. This was going to hurt. I knew I shouldn't pick. But just staring at that black line was unbearable. I just had to be careful. Slow and delicate. After all, a foreign object in a healing wound couldn't be good, right? I grabbed a pair of tweezers, some rubbing alcohol, and a bandage to deal with the inevitable blood. Slowly, I reached out with the tweezers and tried to grip the tip of the black line, but it kept slipping free, like it had a mind of its own. Finally, on the fourth attempt, my patience wore thin. I grabbed it at the base, clamped down, and yanked. It came free along with the scab and a small trickle of blood. I dropped the tweezers and cupped the bleeding spot under my eye, cursing myself. I splashed alcohol on the wound, hissing at the burn, then slapped a bandage over it. When I turned back to the sink to grab the tweezers, I froze. My scab was twitching. I stared in horror as I realized the black line wasn't a hair. It was a leg. One of many. I stood there, watching the little legs kick as the scab, which I now realized wasn't a scab at all but some grotesque little beetle latched to my skin, flailed, trying to right itself. Maybe it was the medicine. My head wasn't right. It had to be some bug I just hadn't noticed. I flipped it over with the tweezers. Its underside, no, what made up its back, was a rusty brownish red shell that looked exactly like a scab. The moment it landed on its legs, it took off, scrambling uselessly against the ceramic sink. I turned on the faucet and washed it down the drain. I stood there shaking, skin crawling. I'd mistaken some giant bed bug for a scab on my eye, and it had latched on so tightly it hadn't even moved when I woke. That's what bed bugs do, right? They're supposed to be sneaky. Maybe that explained the rash. The realization made my stomach turn. I had to check my bed. I walked from the bathroom to my cheap mattress, scratching my arm as I went. I flipped it. Nothing. I stripped the sheets, the pillowcases. No shells. No stains. They had to be coming from somewhere. I got down on my hands and knees and checked the wooden frame. That's when I saw it. Another red bug, lying on its back beside a dust bunny. I scooped it up with my slipper to get a closer look. It was bigger than the first. Its shell was lumpy, edged in white. That same rusty reddish brown. It looked exactly like a scab. Not camouflage. Not resemblance. Exact. No. No, 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 no. Oh God, no. The thought finally clicked. I looked down at my arms. Scabs lined them. Under my arms. On my hands. My elbows. Rusty reddish brown. And on one or two thin black lines. Moving. I scratched. I couldn't help it. The sensation, the sight, knowing they were all over me. I raked my nails down my arm and felt something rip free. One fell onto its back, flailing. Another vanished into some crevice. I kept scratching. Pain burned through me, but the sight of a third barely hanging on sent me into a frenzy. Scabs and blood dropped to the floor. Some ran when they hit the ground. Others bolted toward my feet, trying to crawl up my legs. I stomped and jerked around, half hysterical. When one made it into my shirt, I tore the stained thing off. I couldn't tell where it went. Every scab felt like it was moving. I slapped and rubbed at my skin until I stumbled back into the bathroom, desperate for the mirror. I grabbed the alcohol, tore the cap off, and dumped it across my stomach. The burn was immediate. Wounds bubbled. 2 of the things fell free, writhing on the tile. After that, everything blurred. The 911 operator must have thought I was insane. Who would believe me? But when the police arrived and saw me, they labeled my apartment hazardous immediately. I don't know what happened to my neighbors. I don't know if they evacuated the building. They brought me to some kind of medical facility. Chemical wash. Observation. They grabbed my phone and charger on the way out. Thank God. I overheard one of the staff mention dermestis scabiformis while they were taking notes. So I guess this isn't their first rodeo. It's been 2 days and I guess I'm healing well. The wounds have scabbed over again. They keep telling me not to pick. But wouldn't you? Sometimes my bedroom door doesn't lead to the hallway. Usually it does. On most nights, I can get out of bed, walk out the doorway, and go to the bathroom no problem. I can wake up, get dressed, and go to work without issue. Most of the time. But on March 2nd, 2011, I was rudely awakened by the howling of a pack of wolves that were prowling the forest outside my room. They didn't come in, and I didn't feel threatened by them, just extremely confused. I smelled the sap of the trees and the rain-drenched dirt. I could feel the wind whipping between the branches and through the doorway. The wolves didn't seem to notice me, and I blinked, rubbed my eyes groggily, and stared out into the hallway, dimly lit by the night light. I would have assumed I was dreaming or hallucinating were it not for the traces of damp dirt and leaves that had been carried into my bedroom by the wind. Anyway, it continued like that for a while. Sometime in 2017, I got home after a long day at the office and trudged upstairs. I walked past the nightlight I'd long since outgrown and approached the doorway to my bedroom. The blazing sun beat down on me from the desert within. I sighed and went back downstairs. It had become passé at this point. I knew my room would come back eventually, so I just went to sleep on the couch. Sometimes it was worse than others. There was one night early in 2019 that I nearly drowned as my door suddenly led to the bottom of the sea. A torrent of briny water rushed in and swept me out of my bed. I heard sparks and shattering glass as the waves crashed over my nightstand, and I was barely able to take a deep breath before going under. Up was down, left was right, everything was chaos. And then I was back on the floor of my bedroom, peeling kelp and a starfish off my sopping forehead like some cartoon character. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. It went on like this for years. Every so often, my doorway just became some sort of portal to somewhere else. I was almost never in any sort of danger, and I never mapped out any sort of pattern to the timing or locations, so all I could do was hunker down and let it pass. It rarely lasted more than a few minutes. But last week, all of that changed. I was fast asleep, when suddenly an agonized scream pierced the air. I jumped to my feet in a cold sweat. I'd never heard anything like that before. My eyes slowly, hesitantly panned over to the doorway. I expected to see a mental asylum or triage operating room or something. Instead, What greeted my gaze was a vast, gray, craggy plain suspended over an abyss of blood-red stars. Periodically, a star began to vibrate rapidly, then fold in on itself, emitting yet another impossibly pained scream. In its place was pure, inky blackness before eventually, this canvas of unreality appeared to bleed a new star into existence. With some trepidation, I stepped toward the doorway. I had no idea what this place was, but I felt it calling to me. Are you familiar with the call of the void? It's a phenomenon where people standing over cliffs, balconies and the like suddenly feel an urge to jump, even if they're not remotely suicidal, sometimes followed by an intense sense of panic and remorse. This felt similar. I had no desire to enter this hellish abyss, but I also felt myself inexorably drawn toward the entryway. I couldn't stop my legs from walking closer and closer. My ears began to ring with a bizarre chittering noise, indistinct whispers that, frighteningly, almost made sense. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. It was cold, colder than I'd ever felt before. It almost seemed like whatever unseen force was drawing me into the abyss was pulling all warmth and light out of my room. I shivered, and took another unwilling step. As I approached the door, an arm shot up from below my field of view. An emaciated hand gripped the bottom of the doorway and clawed desperately for purchase. Its muscles flexed as it attempted to pull its unseen body up. I froze. I had no idea who or what this creature was. I didn't know if it was human, if it meant me harm, if it was a victim or a perpetrator or... And before I had a chance to even process that, the door returned to normal. My standard hallway was back. The only evidence of that hell was the creature's severed fingers lying at my feet, the grisly sight dimly lit by the night light that had become my anchor to reality. Every other time the doorway shifted, it went to somewhere easily identifiable. I don't know what's causing it, or where these areas physically are, but they logically make sense as a space on this earth. But that place was an impossible nightmare realm. I've talked to scientists, priests, professors, psychics, the crazy old guy who runs the Curiosities shop on Grand. No one seems to have the foggiest what's going on, or why the phenomenon is isolated to my bedroom door. Almost none of them believed me to begin with. All I know is that I've signed the papers to sell the house, and it's slated for demolition. At first it was a relief, but then it hit me. What happens if the phenomenon occurs again after the doorway is reduced to rubble? When Frankie died, I couldn't get over the irony of the accident that killed him. He was the only reason I'd joined the fire department to begin with. Before him I'd been an aimless soul, kicking between school and a house full of fading childhood memories with an apathy that would have ended me if I'd let it. Meeting Frankie changed it all for me. Neither of us had the best start in life. My parents had died of cancer one after the other, leaving me to be raised by my grandma from the age of 6, and Frankie's mother and father were meth addicts that routinely abandoned him and his little brother to fend for themselves as though they'd forgotten they had children to begin with. Frankie wasn't the sort of kid you'd leave in charge of your dependents either. He was skinny and angry, full of an intense energy that scared the shit out of his teachers and kept the peers that might have bullied him well out of his way, and out of mine too, purely through my association with him. In spite of this, Frankie's brother Caleb looked up to him, and I did, too, because no matter how wild he was, Frankie always seemed to be doing something, whether it was an amateur money-making scheme or working out a way to sneak us into places we shouldn't have been and wouldn't have dared go on our own. Old warehouses, the back rooms of clubs and bars, school after dark. As if by some weird magic we never got caught. Frankie seemed to know how to get out of anything or anywhere, talking so fast he could avoid trouble as much by bewildering the listener than reasoning with them. Then as he got older and calmed down a little, Frankie announced he wanted to use that knack he had to help people instead. It was like listening to a hero declare his manifesto. I was immediately in, signing up to the fire service with him practically that same day. He and I trained together for a couple of years, eventually becoming part of a team together, the routine and the heavy nature of the work grounding us after the dual chaos of our boyhood. Part of that work was keeping fatalities to a minimum, but being first responders in a crisis meant that experiencing death was inevitable no matter what we did to prevent it. When there were casualties on a mission, we'd sit together, not necessarily talking, just keeping each other company through the images that came back to us, the sounds still in our heads of the dying, or of those mourning the dead. But when we did speak on what we'd witnessed, Frankie always knew what to say to talk me down from a ledge, how to make me laugh even when the stink of smoke and human flesh seemed solid in my throat. That friendship was the closest I'd been to anyone, or ever will be again. Even on the days I didn't see Frankie, I thought of him, imagining what jokes he'd make, or how he'd solve a particular problem, always with that same quick grin. I was thinking about Frankie when the news came in that he and his girlfriend, Jenny, had burned to death in their home that night before anybody could get to them. An electrical fire, according to the report, that started small and had gotten out of control. I didn't believe it at first, couldn't understand how Frankie, who could do anything, and was totally fearless, had apparently frozen up and forgotten his training, ending up killed just like any regular civilian. But I had to go to his and Jenny's funerals, see the closed coffins and the sickened faces of their relatives, and had to accept that I wasn't getting Frankie back, and neither was the little brother he'd left behind. I felt for Caleb, for although I'd lost my best friend, I still had my grandmother and my work, but the kid had nothing, barely able to afford the house he was living in. I remember how pathetic he looked, walking bent over through the graveyard, gripping his stomach through his cheap shirt like he was nursing a hernia. He wasn't crying. I don't think he'd shed so much as a tear even during the service. He was just shuffling along, ignoring me as I called his name until he disappeared through the gates. Caleb was on my mind a lot in the following months, though not as much as Frankie was. Only returning to the work that had been his cause in life carried me through those days, and even then I barely got by. So when I started seeing things in the fires we were called out to handle, I kept it to myself. I didn't want the sympathy or probing into my mental health. The time off the squad would force me to accept if they thought I couldn't handle myself. I couldn't stand the idea of being alone with my grief, as though that kind of haunting was the worst of the two. But I know now I should have taken that time off, even left the service altogether rather than see what I did again and again and again. It started with a fire that had broken out at a high school nearby. Some kid had been screwing around in science class and ended up setting the whole room alight. A few of the pupils were still trapped inside the building when my team showed up, and by then we only had a narrow window of time left to get them out. My colleague Daryl and I were sent in for the job, being that we were both known to keep a cool head under pressure. Growing up with Frankie's madness had taught me that, and I held on to the memory like a charm as we entered the premises. Shouldering open the science classroom door, I made out a figure moving ahead of me through the smoke, too large to be one of the children. Within seconds I realized that it wasn't solid either, though I saw it clearly enough that my partner jerked his head to follow my gaze. It was a man's shape, though made entirely by the patterns and colors of the fire, like the skin of some creature camouflaged within it. The face, when it unmistakably turned to stare at me, was familiar. Though the eyes and mouth were only dark gaps formed between the moving flames, I knew that it was smiling in the way I knew so well. That fast, reckless grin. "Frankie?" I said aloud. He wouldn't have heard me over the noise if he had really been there, still living, but this Frankie, this weird, impossible version of him, did. He raised a hand to me, and without thinking I followed him into the fire, stumbling as I did so over the body of one of the lost kids beneath a broken desk. I knew even before I glanced down at her that the girl was gone. Even after all those years in the profession, I still took it hard when I encountered death. But what I felt then was beyond sadness or shock, beyond horror. It was deeper than that. Bleaker than that. Cold sweat ran down me with the warmth, and still I kept looking for Frankie through the fire, wanting him to come back to me as much as I feared what it would mean if he did. But he was gone by then, and I still had work to do. I pushed on, Darryl moving at my side with wordless efficiency. Every student that had been trapped in the classroom died that day, either from burns, smoke inhalation, or from being struck by fallen cabinets and debris that had come down in the blaze. That I had glimpsed Frankie before this discovery clearly signified something, though what that was I didn't know. Strangely, I didn't doubt for a moment that I had seen him, though unlike my grandmother, who paid visits to spirit mediums and read tea leaves for her wary house guests, I had never given much thought to ghosts, even to decide how much I really believed in them. Still, it never occurred to me to consider if I was hallucinating through the pain of having lost Frankie, or picking patterns out of the fire that weren't really there. I was certain of what I'd experienced, and though I didn't know how or why, I accepted it quietly as I had all the death around me. Again I went back to work, the coping mechanism that was also the source of my daily suffering, an endless, self-eating loop. I never expected to see Frankie after that, but I did, and many times. Always in fires, and always in the cases that proved fatal for the victims, his lanky frame moving away out of reach. Frankie would never answer when I called his name or asked why he was there, though I was positive he heard me, his grin formed by a twist of flame, the black eyes seeming to narrow in recognition. Soon I began to dread seeing him. I withdrew into myself, didn't talk more than I had to. The boys at the station must have noticed, but being that they all knew how badly losing Frankie tore me up, none of them said anything about it. None, that is, but Darryl, who'd been at my side since the funeral, trying as hard as he could to be a friend to me even when I made it obvious I didn't care for one. He checked in with me after every shift, hovering around as I prepared to leave, nearly falling down with stress and exhaustion. "I'm fine, Dee," I'd say. "Get off my back, all right?" He wouldn't. If anything, he started watching me even more closely, having picked up on something fearful behind my defensive tone. Darryl was with me the day I saw Frankie for the last time. A knocked-over candle had set an old house alight, causing parts of it to fall in on the young family sleeping there. Once we got in, we discovered the 3 dead children almost instantly, their mother lying crushed under a broken ceiling beam, still just about conscious enough to call for help. My partner and I went to her immediately to assess if we could safely remove the beam alone. As Darryl crouched down to talk to the woman, I saw something shift in the flames eating at the perimeter of the room, something I'd seen so many times by then that I recognized it even before I turned around. Frankie was looking out through the fire, watching the woman on the floor behind me die. Suddenly I was unable to see anything but him, that awful face made of flame and the charred walls behind it encompassing my vision. My chest was pierced by the tight airlessness of panic, so overwhelming that I thought I might pass out if it lasted any longer. It was Darryl shouting my name that broke me out of it. Glancing back over my shoulder, I saw him staring at me through his visor, both hands gripping one end of the beam that had struck the woman down. Then Darryl's helmet swiveled abruptly, and I realized with a feverish pulse of my blood that he'd seen Frankie, too. "I need your help, man," said Darryl, raising his voice to be heard through his apparatus. "Can you get over here?" He hadn't noticed that the woman under the beam was dead, her face turned on its neck so that she, too, seemed to be looking at the place Frankie had been. Whether she'd seen him or not, I'll never know. It was after the team and I returned to the station to debrief that Darryl led me away from the others via a careful hand on my shoulder and sat me down out of earshot. "You saw him," he said. "Frankie. You've been seeing him for months. Am I right?" I didn't bother denying it, just nodded and took a gulp of the bottle of water I'd been carrying around the station, as much for the comfort of holding something as out of thirst. Darryl was silent for almost a minute, picking at dirt in the rim of one fingernail. You told anybody about it? He asked at last. Just my grandma, I answered. But she's sort of a hippie type. She goes crazy for this kind of thing. She just came out with some shit about how maybe Frankie's leading me to the dead, or comforting them when they leave the world or whatever. Or that maybe he's just letting me know he's still around. In a cautiously neutral tone, Darryl said, You don't think she could be right? I barked out a laugh. Nah. It felt wrong seeing him. Dark. But I don't know. It's insane, right? Darryl nodded. You gonna tell Caleb about this? Nope. He'll probably think I've lost my fucking mind. Grunting, Darryl got up and walked a stiff lap around the room. He strained something in his right leg, and he cringed with every step. One eye nearly closed in a Popeye squint. If it was my brother, I'd want to know, he said. Might help. I heard Caleb's not doing too great. You should go over and see him. Could help you too. Harshly, I said. I don't need it. Darryl's squinting eye widened. Man, I've been watching you like a damn hawk since all this started. You're messed up. You need to talk all this over with somebody. Emptying the last of the water bottle, I dropped its empty carcass on the floor. What about you? I asked. You saw Frankie too. Maybe you ought to talk to somebody. With a gentle patience, Darryl picked up the bottle and threw it into a nearby trash can. I didn't know Frankie the way you did. It didn't hit me the same. But all those dead people we couldn't save. That's what gets to me. Gets me all the time. I realized then how selfish I'd been, so locked up in my own grief that I'd forgotten we were all part of it, all forced to keep on keeping on even as it bled like a bad wound. Yeah, I know, I said quietly. It gets me too. I went over to Caleb's house that night with a pack of beers, wishing that I hadn't left it for so long. Frankie had been dead for well over a year, and aside from the odd text message here and there, I hadn't kept in touch. Caleb and I had never been close. He'd tagged along on some of those childhood adventures with Frankie, but he'd always been an afterthought, a timid hanger-on. Now when Caleb came to the door, he looked worse than he had at the funeral, his hair in oily strings, an unwashed smell coming off him that was near thick enough to taste. His eyes moved from me to the cans as though considering turning me away, but without saying a word he let me in and collapsed into a stained couch, a shape like a snowman kicked down by kids, left to melt. He hadn't decorated for Christmas even though it was just around the corner. I kept glancing at the empty space where Frankie used to put the tree with a sense of unease at another thing missing from our shared world. You need help with anything, buddy? I asked. You know, if you're having a hard time keeping up with everything. I don't need anything, said Caleb. Doing fine. He didn't touch the beers, I noticed, just sat looking at the door as though waiting for me to leave. Likely hoping I would. You don't look so great, Kay, I said. You ought to come to a bar with me sometime. Get back into the swing of things. Caleb nodded, but didn't say anything in reply. I plucked at the ring pull on one of the beer cans anxiously. Kay, I said. It's gonna sound nuts, but there's something you need to know. It's about Frankie. Hearing his brother's name, Caleb started in his seat. What about him? Sorry, I said, wondering if it had been a mistake to come here while the death was still so fresh to him. I know how it feels losing him, is all. It fucked me up too. But listen, something's been happening to me since then. You're not gonna believe it, but I swear it's the truth. Caleb's hands began to twitch, and he pressed them between his knees to keep them still. It's about the fires, he said. Isn't it? I stared at him, trying to figure out his expression in the relative dark of the room. You already know? Who told you? Darryl? He swore he wouldn't say anything till I came by. Look, I don't want to sound crazy, like I'm seeing things or whatever. But he saw it, both of us did. Caleb frowned. Wait. What are you talking about, Drew? I cracked open a beer and got the story out as I drank, watching Caleb squeeze his hands together between his knees in mounting agitation. So anyway, it might not be a bad thing, you know? I said, feeling stupid even as the words left my mouth. I wasn't like my grandmother, with her spell jars and tarot decks. I didn't really believe it. Maybe he's trying to help me with the work. Or could be he just wants us to know he's still here or something. Caleb shook his head violently, the dirty ropes of hair thrashing his forehead. Sure. He wants us to know. But it's not a good thing. You get that, right? I fidgeted, trying not to acknowledge the awful tension that had entered that room, the same I felt in so many fires now. There was something up between you two, I said. Wasn't there? Not with us, said Caleb flatly. With Frankie. I tried to help him. Then I protected him. Then I started losing my nerve, told him I was gonna do something about it. Next thing I knew, he was dead. Figured it was my fault, but now I think that was the plan all along. Everything was building up to this. All of it. Caleb ran the back of his hand across his nose, sniffing thickly. One night last year, Frankie came home on one of his days off, stinking of smoke. His fingernails were black. I couldn't sleep, so I was in the living room watching TV when he came in. He hadn't been expecting me. Stopped dead when he saw me, and right away I knew he'd been up to something. Came out with some excuse. He was a good liar, but he was my brother. I knew him. And I didn't buy a single word. I kind of just left it for a while. Hoped I was wrong, and he really had been camping or whatever he said he'd been doing. But after that I had insomnia for a while. Couldn't sleep more than a few hours a night. Stayed up late and kept on catching him the same way. Smelling like he'd been in a fire when he hadn't called in at the station. I tried to think of ways to get the truth out of him. I'm not confrontational, you know? But in the end he sat down right there where you're sitting now, and he told me all by himself. As if some inner resolve had broken, Caleb reached over and took one of the beer cans. He didn't drink from it, just sat there holding it in both hands, toying with the ring pull. Frankie said he always had this thing about fire. He was drawn to it. Fascinated. For a while he thought he wanted to save people from it, and that's what it was all about. It's why he worked so hard to get into the fire department. For the first couple of years he thought he had it right. That was what he wanted. But then there was some incident where a lady died, the first time you couldn't get somebody out alive. I remember, I said. She was elderly. Smoking in bed and the place just lit up. Furniture fell across the door in the room she was in. She was dead by the time we got to her. I'll never forget it. I tried not to think about how she looked, the stink of fat going up on her body, cooking on her bones. In fact, I'd blocked it out so well over the years that what I remembered most about that night was how Frankie's face had looked through his visor, the black of his dark eyes like some dead thing burned. We'd seen worse responding to various emergencies since then. Little kids killed in vehicular accidents, whole families torn apart by gas explosions, pieces strewn all over the ground for us to find. But the first death you ever see sticks with you, changes you in a way you can't undo no matter how far you grow away from it. That had happened to Frankie, I knew, but it had happened to me, too. I'd never been able to stand the smell of cigarettes since that day and would leave the room whenever my grandma sparked one up. None of my stories ever got her to quit. Frankie would never talk about that call. I said. What did he tell you? Caleb swung forward slightly in his seat like he was going to be sick. He said when he saw the dead woman on fire he got excited about it. Like he was so worked up he got paranoid, you notice. Guess you never did, though. Well, Frankie couldn't stop thinking about what he saw, wishing somehow he'd had a hand in what happened to the old lady. Kept imagining how he would have got that fire going himself without anybody figuring out it was arson. After he'd been on the squad long enough, he started to learn how people got away with it for insurance fraud and shit like that. He didn't do anything with it for a while, though. Just kept his head down and did the work. Tried to act normal even though every time someone died in a blaze he got worked up over it. All the time Caleb talked I was shifting restlessly in my chair, always at the point of leaving and never quite able to do it. In the end, Caleb told me Frankie had started sneaking out on some of his nights off, meaning to scratch the itch that had started in Ms. Hodgson's house. There were lonely people all over town he knew from various calls he'd made over the years, people who were old, or sick, or mentally unsound. People whose families didn't go by enough, or that didn't have family at all. There was an old guy on the outskirts of town that lived by himself and was generally sound asleep by 9 p.m. most nights on account of the cocktail of drugs he was taking to manage an illness. Frankie paid the house a visit, able to get in through an unlocked door at the back unnoticed. Once inside he had, in Caleb's words, done something. Whether he'd turned the stove on or messed with the electrics Frankie wouldn't say, smiling over the secret even as he refused to give it up. All that he'd admit was that he rigged the house to burn in some way he was confident wouldn't be flagged as intentional and left the building to watch from a distance, waiting for his work to pay off. Sure enough, the house went up in flames, and though Frankie couldn't see the old man die, he knew he wasn't getting out alive. He sat, smelling the smoke, watching the fire eat up the building and everything in it, pleased with what he'd done. In love with it, as Caleb put it. In love with the high that came of having power over another person's life that way, and of their death. Every couple of months Frankie would slip out by night and move in on a new target. Over time he developed what he called fire traps, a way of roughly timing the ignition so that he could be present when the call came through to the station. I'd been with him for many of those incidents, fought hard to get out every person caught in their burning homes unharmed. I'd always thought Frankie had been just as dedicated, pushing forward against the flames to carry anyone he found to safety and crouching, silent, by himself for a good while afterwards when his efforts failed. Beating himself up over the tragedy, I'd always assumed. Now I knew he'd been savoring it, committing the sight and smells of death to memory. I grappled the urge to put my head between my knees and puke. "I can't fucking believe it," I said. "I can't believe this is real." Caleb looked at me with huge, dull eyes. "It gets worse. I told Frankie I was going to hand him in. Made something up about him being caught by a security camera, there being enough footage and evidence to nail him. Hell, there probably is. I don't know. I don't know if I could have even gone through with sending him to jail. But I guess I convinced Frankie, because he got this look in his eyes. I can't even describe it. So fucking cold and smug." Caleb took a noisy swig of the beer, spilling part of it. "I thought he'd run off somewhere," he said. "Skip town maybe. But the last thing he said to me was how he wasn't done with the fire traps. How he needed to see one work close up. Wanted to know how it'd feel. Then he left, and well, you know how Frankie died." In a weak voice I said, "You're saying he killed Jenny? Killed himself?" "He did." Caleb and I watched each other from either side of the room, both of us flattened by the same weight. "So why is he back?" I asked. "Is he just screwing with me, or—" The pieces came together for me even before Caleb answered. "I guess Frankie just wanted to set a few more fires," he said, "just to see if he could." Though the only evidence I had was Caleb's word, I reported the arson to the police, or as much of it as I was able to, knowing I'd have no chance of blaming the latest rash of incidents on a ghost. In the cases where there was enough proof to support my claims, the deaths were reclassified as murder, giving the surviving family members who'd always had a lingering sense of doubt over the loss some kind of closure. As for myself, I never saw Frankie again, though I remained with the department for several years after that. I had no way of telling if the haunting was over or if he kept on starting fires unseen the way he had before. Some nights I'd stay up till morning trying to understand why Frankie had shown himself to Daryl and me. But in the end, the closest I felt I got to the truth was the idea that he'd wanted his friends to know who he really was down to the blackened bones of him. The forecast said, "Snow showers." That is the exact phrase that got me to throw my pack in the trunk like I was beating the clock on some fun little weekend reset. Snow showers. By the time I reached the pull-off, the world was already turning white in that slow, steady way that makes you feel like you're inside a shaken snow globe. It wasn't blizzard conditions yet. Just thick flakes and wind that kept changing its mind. The kind of weather where you can still hear your own boots in the powder and convince yourself you're fine. I signed the trail register with a pen that didn't want to work. My glove made my handwriting look like a toddler's. There was one other name above mine, from earlier that morning. No notes. No. Back by sunset. Just a name and a time that felt too early to still matter. The first half mile in, I started second-guessing myself. Not because I was scared. Because every tree looked the same, and snow eats landmarks. Trail blazes disappear when they get frosting on them. Tracks turn into soft dents, and then nothing. Your world shrinks to whatever your headlamp hits, and mine wasn't even on yet. I kept going anyway, because that's how I am. If I've committed to something, I'll drag it behind me like a bad decision on a leash. I picked a spot the way I always do. Not too close to water. Not in a low pocket where cold air settles. Not under dead branches. A little rise off the trail with a couple of thick trunks to break the wind. Nothing dramatic. Just a place that looked like it would still be there when I woke up. Setting up in snow is never graceful. I stamped out a rectangle with my boots until the powder packed down. Dug out a shallow trench for my vestibule so I wouldn't be crawling into a drift. Anchored my guylines with buried sticks because the ground was too frozen for stakes. My fingers went numb halfway through and I told myself it was fine, because I had a sleeping bag rated way colder than this and a stove and those little hand warmers that smell like pennies when they heat up. It should have been simple. It should have just been cold. While I worked, the woods kept doing that thing where it goes quiet in patches. Not the normal snow muffle sound. Quiet. I mean the kind where you realize you haven't heard a bird in a while. No squirrel chatter. No little taps from branches. Just wind, and the soft hiss of snow landing on nylon. The first time I noticed it, I actually stopped and listened, like I expected someone to clear their throat behind a tree. Nothing. I finished pitching the tent and went to fetch more deadfall for a small fire. Not to be dramatic. Just because fire makes the dark feel less personal. That's when I saw the tracks. They weren't mine. Mine were wide, boot-shaped, predictable. These were longer, like someone had taken a shovel and dragged it toe first. A single line of impressions, deep enough to show wet under the powder. Each one spaced too far apart to be walking normally. I followed them without thinking. 10 steps. 20. They went in a straight line between two stands of pine, and then they stopped at a scoured patch where the wind had polished the snow down to hard-packed near exposed stone. No clean turn. No tidy return trail. Just the last drag mark fading into a surface that didn't hold detail the way fresh powder does. I stood there with my gloved hand still gripping a dead branch, staring at the last mark until the storm started filling everything in. The wind picked up and a spray of powder hit my face. That's when I heard something behind me. Not footsteps. More like a slow drag. Like someone pulling a heavy bag over crusted snow. I whipped around fast enough to almost lose my balance. All I saw was the thinning light between trees, and my own breath, and the start of my boot trail back to camp. The dragging sound stopped the second I turned. I did the thing you're not supposed to do. I called out. "Hello?" My voice sounded wrong. like it didn't belong in the woods. No answer. Of course, no answer. I told myself it was a branch, a deer, the wind moving a downed log, anything that fit into the normal world. Then I noticed something I hadn't noticed the first time. Those long tracks weren't centered the way a person's would be. They weren't two parallel lines like skis either. They were slightly off, like whatever made them had one side of its body heavier than the other. Like it leaned. I carried the branch back to camp and tried to shake it off. I got my fire going with a little stove fuel and stubbornness. The flame fought the wind but didn't quit. It popped and snapped like it was annoyed. I ate a sad dinner standing up. Instant noodles in a metal cup, because sitting on snow makes your body remember exactly what heat is worth. I kept turning my head to check the trees, not because I saw anything, but because my brain kept insisting I should. The storm thickened in layers. It wasn't just snow now. It was snow with teeth. Gusts that shoved it sideways. Flakes stinging my cheeks. Visibility dropping until the firelight felt like a little island and everything outside it was just a wall. I crawled into the tent early. Not because I was tired. Because being outside started to feel like being watched through frosted glass. Inside, everything was close and loud. Nylon breathing. Zippers clicking. My sleeping pad squeaking every time I shifted. I stripped off wet layers and stuffed them into a bag so they wouldn't freeze into boards. I checked my phone. No service, obviously. The battery already draining faster than it should in the cold. I lay there with my headlamp off, listening. Wind. Snow. Tent fabric snapping. Then, very faint, the drag again. Not outside the tent. Further out. Somewhere between the tree line and the trail. Drag. Pause. Drag. I held my breath like that mattered. The dragging got closer. Slow. Patient. I sat up and turned my headlamp on. The beam turned the inside of my tent into a bright little fish tank. I stared at the nylon, like I could see through it if I stared hard enough. Drag. Pause. Then something touched the outside of the tent. Not a gust. Not snow sliding. A pressure, deliberate, like a palm placed flat against it. The fabric bowed inward and held. I didn't move. I don't mean I stayed calm. I mean my body went rigid in a way that felt automatic. The pressure slid, just a little, like whatever was out there was feeling along the seam. It stopped near the zipper. I grabbed my knife. I always carry a small fixed blade for camp stuff. Cutting cord. Shaving kindling. It looked stupid in my hand suddenly. Like bringing a pocket knife to an argument with the weather. The fabric at the zipper pulled. Not the zipper itself. The fabric around it, like fingers trying to find purchase. I didn't think. I lunged forward and shoved both hands against the door, pushing back from the inside, trying to keep whatever it was from getting leverage. For a second, there was resistance. Real resistance. Something solid. Then the pressure vanished. The tent snapped back into place. Silence. I sat there in that awful bright circle of headlamp light, sweating in my base layer, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing happened. That was worse. After a few minutes, I forced myself to breathe normally. I clicked the headlamp to red mode and unzipped the door just enough to look out. Snow blasted in immediately, cold and sharp. I squinted into it. The beam of my light got swallowed fast, just a short cone before it dissolved into white. I couldn't see anything, but I could see the marks. There were fresh impressions right outside my vestibule, partially filling with snow. Not boot prints. Not animal tracks. Those long, leaning drags, ending inches from my door. And mixed in with them, very faint, were thinner lines, like something with nails or claws had raked the snow as it moved. The prints didn't lead away. They circled my tent. Not a clean circle. More like it had paced around, stopping, starting, doubling back, then pressing close again. I zipped the tent shut so hard the teeth snagged. And that's when I heard it. A sound that made my stomach drop because it was trying, badly, to be familiar. It was a voice. Not a word. Not a sentence. Just a low, throaty attempt at the shape of a human sound. The way a parrot can mimic a laugh without understanding it. It came from somewhere beyond the trees, past the edge of my light. It went, "Hey." Soft. Almost polite. Then silence. Then closer. "Hey." The second one had more breath in it. More confidence. I pressed my mouth into my sleeve to keep my own breathing quiet, like a kid hiding under covers. "Hey." It tried again, right outside the tent now. So close I felt it more than heard it, like the nylon was carrying the vibration. The voice was wrong in a way I can't explain without sounding dramatic. It wasn't scary because it was loud. It was scary because it wasn't quite right. Like something had listened to people speak from far away and decided it could do it too. My headlamp beam shook as my hand shook. The tent wall bulged inward again. This time it didn't feel like a palm. This time it felt like a face pressed into it. I saw the shape of it in the nylon, an oval with ridges, like bone or cartilage. The fabric stretched across it and held, showing the suggestion of where eyes would be, where a mouth would be. The mouth moved. "Cold," it said. Then, with a little laugh that sounded like someone choking. "You cold." I don't know why that broke me, but it did. I kicked at the wall where its head was pressed, hard enough to make my heel sting. The shape snapped back. The nylon popped outward. Outside, something made a noise like wet fabric being pulled apart. Then the dragging started again. Faster. Circling. Drag, 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 drag. The whole tent shivered with each pass, like it was brushing against it, bumping it, testing it. I grabbed my car keys. Not because I was going to drive. Because the alarm button felt like the only weapon I had that wasn't a joke. I crawled into my boots, hands shaking so bad I missed the laces twice. I stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack without rolling it, just crammed it down. Threw what I could into my pack half-zipped. I had one thought, clear and bright in my head: get to the car. The storm was thick enough that I couldn't see the trail from my tent. I had to follow my own boot line by feel, like reading Braille with my feet. I unzipped the tent and bolted out. The cold hit me so hard it made my eyes water instantly. Snow slapped my face. Wind shoved my pack like it wanted me on the ground. I took 3 steps and almost fell because the snow had drifted into my boot prints. Behind me, something moved. Not dragging now. Running. It hit the side of my tent with a heavy thump, like it had launched itself at it the second I left, and the whole structure collapsed in on itself. Poles flexed, snapped back, then folded. My little island of shelter crumpled like a kicked soda can. That gave me a horrible, vivid image of it being angry that I was leaving. I ran. My headlamp beam bounced wildly, making the woods strobe. Trees appeared and vanished. My own breath sounded like an engine failing. Then something grabbed my pack. It yanked me backwards so hard my spine jolted. I went down on one knee, pack straps biting into my shoulders. My first thought was that a branch had hooked it. Then the pack moved sideways, smooth and strong, and I realized whatever had it was pulling. I twisted around and my light hit it for half a second. It was low to the ground, but long. Too long. Its body was pale in a way that didn't look like fur or skin. More like packed snow pressed into the shape of something alive. It had limbs, but they didn't bend right. They hinged too many times. And its head. Its head looked like it was wearing a face that didn't fit it. Like it had pressed a mask of frozen skin onto bone. The mouth opened and I saw dark inside, wet and wrong. It didn't roar. It didn't snarl. It went softly, like it was still practicing. Hey! Then it jerked again, trying to pull me off the trail. I did the only thing that made sense. I let my pack go. The straps slipped off my shoulders and the thing went with it, tugging it into the white like it weighed nothing. I scrambled up and sprinted. Behind me, the dragging returned for a second as it adjusted, then it came after me with a new sound, a rapid tapping, like nails on crusted snow. I could hear it gaining. My foot punched through a thin crust, and I went down hard, my shin smacking something buried beneath. Rock or root, I still don't know. Pain flashed hot, and then went oddly dull. I tried to get up and my leg didn't want to cooperate. I forced it anyway, half running, half limping, tears freezing at the corners of my eyes. My headlamp beam caught the trail register sign ahead like a miracle. A reflective rectangle in the storm. The pull-off was close. I hit the edge of the lot, and saw my car as a dark shape under white. I fumbled my keys so badly I dropped them. Had to find them by feel in the snow, fingers clawing, panic making everything clumsy. I got them, jammed the key into the door, yanked it open, nearly fell into the seat. The tapping sound was right behind me now. I slammed the door. The car rocked. Something hit the side hard enough to make the whole frame creak. I locked the doors out of instinct, like a lock meant anything against whatever that was. The windshield was already frosting. Snow plastered against it. I turned the key and the engine coughed once. Then nothing. The battery, cold-soaked. The car had decided to join the storm in being useless. Another impact. This time on the hood. I looked up through the windshield and saw a shape on the glass, inches away, sliding down slowly. Not a face. Not fully. Just a pale oval pressing against the windshield from the outside, leaving a smeared patch where frost melted under it. The mouth moved, muffled through glass. "You cold?" it said. Then it made that choking laugh again. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the panic button, but I did. The car erupted into noise. Horn blaring. Lights flashing. A ridiculous, desperate alarm in the middle of nowhere. The shape flinched. It peeled off the hood and dropped into the snow with that wrong, jointed motion. The head turned toward the sound like it didn't understand it, like it was hearing a new kind of animal. It took a step back. Then another. I hit the ignition again and again, begging the engine like it was a person. On the fourth try it caught. The heater fan whined weakly. The headlights cut through the snow in two pale tunnels. I threw the car into reverse without thinking about traction and the tires spun, then grabbed, then slid. I fishtailed, corrected, and backed onto the road like I was fleeing a burning building. In my rearview mirror, through the chaos of white, I saw it standing at the edge of the lot. Not chasing now. Just watching. It lifted one arm slowly, like someone waving goodbye. Then it raised its hand to its mouth, pressed fingers against it, and moved them like it was shaping sound. "Hey," it said one last time. And it sounded closer to normal than it should have. I drove until I hit pavement that looked plowed and saw lights in the distance. The shaking didn't stop. My shin had swollen under my pants, and when I finally dared to pull over somewhere with a street lamp, I saw blood seeping through the fabric where I'd slammed it on whatever was under that snow crust. The next afternoon, after I'd gotten my leg looked at, I went to the ranger station and asked about the other name on the trail register. The woman behind the counter went still for a second, then told me the register wasn't for public discussion, and that if I wanted information I could file a report. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. At urgent care they did an X-ray and told me nothing was broken, then rinsed the cut and put in a few stitches anyway because the rock had split me open clean through the skin. I keep replaying the way those drag marks circled my tent, stopping at the zipper like it knew what that seam meant. I keep thinking about the way it practiced that one word, over and over, like it was trying to get the tone right. And every time I catch myself wanting to write it off as storm panic, I remember the pressure of something solid through the tent wall, and the sound it made when it peeled away, wet and wrong. I haven't slept outside since. I don't know if this is a confession or a warning. Maybe it's just a scream into the void, because I can't scream out loud anymore. I have to be quiet. For her. For 6 years, I was a night shift nurse on a long-term geriatric ward. If you want to know what it's like to see the human body fail in every conceivable way, slowly and without fanfare, that's the job for you. It's not like the ER, all flashing lights and adrenaline. It's the opposite. It's the slow, quiet dimming of a bulb. My job, as I saw it, was to manage the dimming. To make sure the fuses didn't blow too spectacularly on the way out. Change the sheets, administer the meds, chart the decline. It sounds cold, I know. But after a few years, you have to build a wall. You see so much loss, so much slow motion decay, that if you let it all in, you drown. My wall was made of cynicism and exhaustion. The nights are the worst. The ward takes on a different character after midnight. The daytime bustle of family visits and physical therapists is gone, replaced by a profound, humming silence, punctuated by the rhythmic sigh of a ventilator or the lonely beep of a heart monitor. The air gets thick with the smell of antiseptic and something older, something like dust and regret. My world shrank to the nurse's station, a small island of harsh fluorescent light in an ocean of darkened rooms. My main companion was the bank of security monitors. They were old, cheap things. The feed was grainy, black and white, with a low frame rate that made everything look jerky and unreal. I'd watch the screens, my eyes tracing the vague, sleeping shapes in the beds, making sure no one was trying to climb out of their rails. No one was in distress. It was mostly a form of meditation, a way to pass the hours until the sun came up and I could go home to my own quiet, empty apartment. That's when I first started seeing it. It wasn't something you'd notice right away. I didn't. For weeks, maybe months, I probably saw it and my brain just edited it out, filed it under bad reception or light flare. It looked, for lack of a better word, like heat. A shimmer. The kind you see rising off asphalt on a blistering summer day. A distortion in the air, a patch of reality that seemed to be vibrating at a different frequency. It only ever appeared on the monitors. And it only ever appeared in one place, hovering directly over a patient's bed. The first time I clearly registered it was with a man in room 308. He was a retired mailman, 90-something. His mind long gone to dementia but his body stubbornly clinging on. I glanced at the monitor for his room and saw it. A wavering, vaguely man-shaped column of static and haze hanging over his bed. It had no features, no color, just this intense, silent vibration that made the grainy image of the man beneath it seem to warp and bend. My first thought was a technical issue. A short in the camera, maybe. I got up, stretched, and walked down the hall to his room. The corridor was silent except for the squeak of my own rubber-soled shoes. I pushed the door open gently. The room was still, cool. The only light was the faint orange glow from his four-pump. The air was perfectly clear. The man was sleeping, his breath a shallow, rattling thing. Nothing was there. I checked his vitals, adjusted his blanket, and went back to the nurse's station. On the monitor, the shimmer was gone. 3 hours later, at the end of my shift, the man in 308 passed away. We called the family. The day's shift handled the body. I went home, slept, and didn't think much of it. Coincidence. A week later, it happened again. Room 312. A woman who had outlived all 3 of her children. On the monitor, I saw the same heat haze, the same silent, shimmering distortion hanging over her frail form. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight down there. Again, the room was still and empty. The air was clear. I stood there for a full minute, just listening to her ragged breathing, feeling the hairs on my arms stand up for no reason I could name. I went back to the desk. The shimmer was gone from the screen. She was gone by morning. This time, I was there when her daughter called. I picked up the phone. She was sobbing, but there was something else in her voice too. Confusion. "I don't understand," she said, her voice thick with grief. "I was just with her yesterday afternoon. She was lucid, you know? For a minute. She was holding my hand. I'm so sorry for your loss," I said, the standard line. "But she kept squinting at me," the daughter continued, her voice trembling. "She asked me who I was. She said she couldn't see my face. Just a blur. She sounded so scared." I gave her the hospital's other standard line. The one we gave when the dying brain started to misfire. "It's a common phenomenon," I said, my voice sounding hollow even to myself. "In the final stages, the brain can have difficulty processing visual information. It's just a part of the process, a symptom of the body shutting down." She accepted it, of course. What else could she do? But her words stuck with me. She said she couldn't see my face. The pattern started to become undeniable. A few weeks would pass, then I'd see the shimmer on the monitor in a patient's room. I'd go to check, find nothing, and within a day, that patient would be gone. And then, like clockwork, the phone calls. Always the same story, with slight variations. "My son flew in all the way from the coast," one man told me, his voice choked. "His mother looked right through him. Asked him why a stranger was crying in her room. She was terrified," a young woman whispered over the phone. "She kept saying, 'Your voice is so familiar, but I don't know you. Where are your eyes?' He couldn't see me. She didn't know who I was. Just a blur." Every time, we'd give the official explanation. Hypoxia. Terminal agitation. Brain function decline. And every time, I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Because I knew. I knew it wasn't a symptom of dying. The shimmer on the screen, this heat haze creature, it was doing something. It was there, and then they were gone, and the last thing they experienced was the face of their loved one dissolving into a meaningless abstraction. I tried to tell someone once. A senior nurse I respected. I phrased it carefully, talking about the camera glitches and the strange coincidence of the family reports. She just gave me a tired look and told me to take a few days off. "This place gets to you," she'd said, patting my arm. "You're seeing ghosts in the machine. Get some sleep." So I kept it to myself. I started calling it the scavenger in my head. It felt right. It wasn't killing them. They were already dying. It was just feeding on something on its way out. Something from the wreckage. I became a connoisseur of the low-resolution feed from our ancient security system. I learned to distinguish the shimmer from a dust mote floating in front of the lens, or a trick of the low light. It was an organic, pulsing thing, and seeing it on the screen made my blood run cold. My cynicism, my carefully constructed wall, began to crumble. I was a witness. And then my grandmother fell. She was the one who raised me. My rock. My entire family history condensed into one stubborn, fiercely loving woman who smelled of cinnamon and old books. She broke her hip. A simple fall, but at her age, a simple fall is a death sentence delivered by gravity. The surgery went as well as it could, but the recovery was brutal. Infections. Complications. Delirium. One day, she was in the main hospital, the next, they were transferring her to my ward. My world tilted on its axis. The place I had managed to emotionally wall myself off from, the place that was just a job, suddenly became the most terrifying place on earth. Because now, the scavenger wasn't just some abstract horror I observed from a distance. It was hunting in my home. I pulled every string I could, took on every extra shift. I basically lived at the hospital. My colleagues thought I was being the devoted grandson. They had no idea I was standing guard. My life became a ritual of fear. I'd do my rounds, dispensing medication, changing dressings, all with a knot of dread in my gut. And then I'd sit at the nurse's station, my eyes glued to one monitor in particular. The small, grainy, black and white window into my grandmother's room. Every flicker of the screen, every shadow, sent a jolt of panic through me. I saw the scavenger everywhere. In the reflection on the linoleum floor. In the steam rising from a cup of coffee. I was unraveling. The other nurses started giving me wide berth. I was jumpy, irritable, my eyes wide and bloodshot from lack of sleep and an overdose of caffeine. I spent the time I wasn't at the monitor in her room, holding her hand. She was mostly sleeping, frail and small in the oversized hospital bed. But sometimes she'd wake up, and her eyes, clouded with pain and medication, would find mine. "There you are," she'd whisper, her voice a dry rustle. And she'd smile. A real smile. And I would think, it won't take this. I won't let it. I needed a plan. I couldn't just watch and wait for it to appear. I had to be able to do something. The thing was only visible on the camera. It was invisible to the naked eye in the room. What was it about the camera? Was it the infrared? The low-light sensitivity? It was something about the light, or the lack of it. It existed in that gray space between light and shadow. So I thought, what if I introduced a lot of light? Suddenly. Violently. I went online and ordered the most powerful tactical flashlight I could find, and it had a disorienting strobe function, the kind police use to blind and confuse suspects. It felt insane buying a weapon for a ghost, but it was the only thing I could think of. When it arrived, I kept it in the pocket of my scrubs at all times. It was a heavy, cold lump against my thigh, a constant reminder of the vigil I was keeping. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. My grandmother's condition stabilized, then began to slowly, inevitably, decline. I was in a constant state of low-grade terror. The exhaustion was bone-deep. My body felt like it was humming with a terrible energy. I'd doze off at the desk and jerk awake, heart pounding, convinced I'd missed it. And then, one night it happened. It was 3:17 a.m. The ward was as quiet as a tomb. I was staring at the monitors, my vision blurring, when I saw it. The air over my grandmother's bed began to ripple. It started small, a faint distortion, like a heat haze mirage. But it grew, coalescing into that familiar, sickening, man-shaped shimmer. It was larger than I'd ever seen it before, more defined. It pulsed, a silent, ghastly vibration in the monochrome feed, and it was directly over her. I could see the image of her blankets, and her sleeping form bend and warp beneath it. A sound escaped my throat, a strangled gasp. For a second, I was frozen, my blood turning to ice water. The screen was a window into a nightmare, and the nightmare was in her room. Then, the adrenaline hit me like a physical blow. I didn't think. I just moved. I was out of my chair and running before I was even consciously aware of the decision. My feet pounded down the hallway, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers closing around the cold metal of the flashlight. My thumb found the switch. I burst through the door to her room so hard it slammed against the stopper. The room was dark, just as I knew it would be. The air was still. I couldn't see anything. My grandmother was stirring, her head turning on the pillow, disturbed by the noise. "Who's there?" she murmured, her voice weak. There was no time. I raised the flashlight, aimed it at the empty space above her bed where I knew the thing was hovering, and I slammed my thumb down on the strobe button. The world exploded into a silent, strobing cataclysm of pure white light. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The air itself seemed to scream, though there was no sound. The creature, the scavenger, recoiled from the light as if struck. It wasn't just that it shied away. The strobing flashes, the rapid-fire assault of light dark, did something to it. It forced it into a state of temporary solidity. And for a single, soul-shattering second, I saw it. It was faces. Hundreds of them. A screaming, swirling, three-dimensional mosaic of human faces, all crushed together into one writhing, humanoid shape. They were pale and translucent, their features overlapping, their mouths open in silent, confused agony. They weren't just any faces. I recognized them. I saw the retired mailman from 308, his eyes wide with a terror his dementia had never allowed. I saw the woman who had outlived her children, her face a mask of pleading confusion. I saw a man who had died of pneumonia 2 months prior, a woman from a stroke last winter. Face after face, patient after patient, all of them taken from this very ward. All the people whose families had called, confused and heartbroken. All the people who had died unable to recognize the ones they loved. The faces were the creature. It was made of them. Made of what it had taken. The strobing light hit it again, and with a final, violent contortion, it dissolved like smoke in a hurricane, and was simply gone. The room was plunged back into darkness, the only light the steady orange glow from the fore-pump. The silence that rushed in was deafening. My own ragged breathing sounded like a roar. The flashlight slipped from my trembling hand and clattered to the floor. What in heaven's name was that? My grandmother's voice. It was clear. Frightened, but clear. I stumbled to her bedside, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. "It's okay," I stammered, my voice cracking. "It's okay. It was just a bad dream." I reached out and took her hand. Her skin was cool and papery. She turned her head, and her eyes, clear and focused in the dim light, found mine. There was no confusion. No blur. She saw me. She squeezed my hand weakly. "You look so tired," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "My boy. You're here." I started to cry. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gulping sobs of terror and relief. I had done it. I had saved her. For now. She had looked at me, and she had seen me. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't sit at that desk and watch that screen, knowing what was really there. Knowing that the hospital wasn't just a place where people died, but a feeding ground. My grandmother was discharged to my care a week later. She's with me now, in my small apartment. Every lamp is on, all the time. Our electricity bill is astronomical, but I don't care. There are no dark corners. I bought 3 more of those tactical flashlights. There's one in every room. I've even rigged a DJ-style strobe light in the living room, where she sleeps in a hospital bed I had delivered. I have it on a timer. Sometimes it just goes off, flooding the room with that violent, cleansing light. It terrifies her, but it's better than the alternative. I don't sleep. Not really. I doze in a chair by her bed, for an hour at a time, maybe 2. I've set alarms on my phone to go off every 45 minutes, jolting me awake. Every time I close my eyes, I see that collage of faces, swirling in the dark. I see what it's made of. I know it's still out there. I know it's patient. It's waiting for me to fail. It's waiting for me to get sloppy, to get too tired. It's waiting for the moment I finally succumb to the exhaustion that is chewing away at his soul, the moment I fall into a deep, real sleep. But I won't let it. I won't let her last moments be spent staring into the face of her grandson, and seeing nothing but a blur. She will not die alone, surrounded by strangers. When her time comes, she is going to look at me. And she is going to see my face. She is going to know that I am here. I will be the last thing she sees. I will burn my image into her memory with every light I own. I will stand between her and that shimmering, hungry darkness. I don't know how long I can keep this up, But I have to. Because I am her grandson, and I am here, and I will not let it have her.